And hello there. Glad to have folks coming in to the University of St. Thomas Career Center's job and internship search through the lens of first generation and BIPOC students. I'm sure we'll have folks joining us gradually in the next few minutes. And so hang on tight and we will start as soon as we have most of the people in the room. Thanks. Getting close. All right, we're about halfway there. That's good. We'll be starting in just a minute after we see a lot of folks coming in, and I'm sure people will be coming in as we go on too. So we'll give people about another minute before we start this webinar. Thanks for being here. We're really excited to see the interest in this particular topic. For our first time effort, it was really quite gratifying. Okay. You know, we're kind of stopped for a moment, so it's 12:03 and I can start doing a little bit of an introduction. And people, I'm sure, will chime in as we go on. So welcome to the University of St. Thomas Career Center's webinar, Job and Internship Search through the lens of first generation and BIPOC students. It is our custom here at the University of St. Thomas to begin every session with our land acknowledgement, and this is delivered by our Dean of Students, Linda Bachman. Go ahead.
I'm going to ask us all to pause for a moment. As an educational institution, we recognize the importance of learning history and understanding the significance of the land our university is on. As a Catholic institution, we strive to uphold the dignity of every human being. Please share in the land acknowledgement with me. Inspired by Catholic intellectual tradition, we invite you to reflect on these scripture verses that offer us guidance in this endeavor.
Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. But someone will say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I, by my works, will show you my faith. The University of St. Thomas occupies the ancestral and current homelands of the Dakota people, Minnesota Makoche. We also recognize the Ojibwe and Ho-Chunk, whose lands were colonized by the United States and are currently occupied by the state of Minnesota.
We condemn the tools of settler colonialism, including genocide and forced assimilation, undertaken in the name of white supremacy that created structures of injustice and inequity that continue to oppress and marginalize Indigenous and underrepresented peoples.
We work towards the process of decolonizing minds and educating students to be morally responsible leaders. We commit to the work of truth-telling and relationship building as we seek new pathways forward as relatives in the University of St. Thomas community, the Indigenous communities, and those who traverse multiple communities.
And again, my welcome. I'm Jennifer Rogers, Associate Director of Employer Engagement in St. Thomas's Career Development Center. Before I introduce our event today, I just wanted to, by this slide, remind everybody about who we are. This slide contains the University of St. Thomas mission statement. And it's my experience that each of us who work here have embraced this and really try to live it out and keep it in mind as we plan our engagements with students and with you, our employer partners. We're the largest of Minnesota's private colleges with a total enrollment of close to 10,000 students. And if any of you would like more details about the breakdown of our academic programs and enrollments, I am happy to talk to you at another time. So now a little bit of background. In an effort to fulfill our goal, our Career Development Center goal to be a resource to our employer partners, we've invited you to this event. Our topic is about acknowledging that our first generation and BIPOC students bring their identities, not just to college, but to their internship and job searches and their first career experiences. So in order to learn more about these students, their life experiences, and their perceptions of the job search process, I thought we needed to hear from a variety of voices. We'll be bringing to you St. Thomas staff and faculty working directly with our first generation and BIPOC students, graduates of St. Thomas, and corporate senior D&I leaders representing 2 of our employer partners. Now I'm giving you a disclaimer. Think of this as a short survey course. We could easily do an entire day or multiple days on this topic to do it justice. So in a little more than an hour, we will simply hope to just obtain a broad overview. And hopefully we will find opportunities to convene more interactive sessions in the future. The registration form included space to offer up some questions for our speakers. Therefore, if there's time in advance for audience questions, we have these, and we have our illustrious fearless leader, our director of the Career Development Center, Mark Sorensen Wagner, will be monitoring the Q&A as we go along. So feel free to enter your questions in the Q&A. All right, Sandra, let's talk about the agenda specifically for this event. After introductions, we will play a pre-recorded video that includes a message from Tanya Peterson, our Director of Retention and Student Success. And following this, I'll be asking questions of each of our panelists. I'll be talking separately to our interim dean of our Doherty Family College and separately to Chris Donnelly, director of our internship programs there. And then we will bring together our corporate D&I senior leadership. Then if there's time, as I said, we'll open this up to questions. So panelists, this is our chance to have you introduce yourself before we begin. So we'll ask everybody to come on camera. And we're starting with our staff and faculty from our Doherty Family College. So Buffy, can you please start us off and provide a brief description of St. Thomas's Doherty Family College as you introduce yourself? Oh, you're on mute, Buffy. There you go.
Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Sure.
My name is Buffy Smith, and I have the privilege to serve as the interim dean of Doherty Family College at the University of St. Thomas. At Doherty Family College, we provide our amazing scholars with a comprehensive and culturally affirming academic and social supports that they need to earn their associate degree. We create a seamless academic pathway for them to earn their bachelor's degree. And in addition, we provide opportunities for them to explore career options through our paid internship experience. At Doherty Family College, our motto is that we make college graduation a reality.
And Chris, can you introduce yourself and your role there at the Doherty Family College?
Hello, everybody. Welcome. I am Chris Donnelly. I'm the director of our professional internship program here at Doherty Family College. I came over here right as we were launching this program, and I have the opportunity then of being with our first year students in the classroom teaching professional development course to them, and then helping place them and support them throughout their internships, which all of our students are eligible for. Prior to this, I had a 15-year career as a marketing executive in the magazine publishing side, so I understand both sides of this picture.
Thanks, Chris. And our next slide will show a representation of the 2 organizations that are represented by our senior D&I leaders, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota and Anderson Windows. Tracy, I believe you're first up on our introduction slide, so please take it away and introduce yourself. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to be able to share with you and to share best practices as well. I'm Tracy Gibson. I'm the Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer for Anderson Windows and Doors, one of the largest window and door companies in the country. I have a career of 30 years with Cargill Incorporated. I am an accountant by trade, but an HR professional by passion. I also spent 3 years at the state of Minnesota prior to joining Anderson as the Chief Diversity Officer and Vice President. And in this role, I also own talent acquisition. So I'm glad to be with you today and thank you for the opportunity.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Angel Udine. I'm the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota. I've been with the organization for coming up on 3 years this coming August, and prior to that was in financial services, working with some of our larger and regional banks as well in the DEI space. I am responsible for the DEI strategy and execution within the organization, but I work very closely with our Racial and Health Equity Director and Vice President with regards to mitigating systemic racism and inequities in healthcare throughout the state of Minnesota. I'm honored to be here today with you guys because I've had a long-standing relationship with Doherty Family College as well as the University of St. Thomas, and it is my pleasure to be a part of this because I believe the work that we do is incumbent of all of us to do it together instead of trying to do it individually.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Angel. And we thank all of our panelists here. The pre-recorded piece that we're going to show is really an introduction of Tanya Jones Peterson. She, in addition to being our Director of Retention and Student Success, is a developer of our Proud to Be First program. She had the great idea to say, we need to bring in the voices of our alumni and have them share some of their experiences in this job and internship search process. So that's what she did. She has interviewed 2 of our first generation graduates, Andrea and Jafar. And Xander, I believe the next slide, we have a couple of our registrants emailed me in advance and they said, we'd like to know what questions were asked of the alumni. So I've included within this deck a summary of those questions. And as I said, we'll be sending this out to those of you participating here today. So let's start this event by sharing an abbreviated, it was much longer, but we had to abbreviate and edit down this version of this conversation between Tanya Peterson and 2 of our alumni now.
Hello, my name is Tanya Jones Peterson, and I've worked at St. Thomas for 14 years. During this time, I've served in a variety of roles, first as managing a mentor program for first-year students of color through the Office of Student Diversity and Inclusion Services. Following that, I was an academic counselor, and my current role is to serve the St. Thomas campus community as the Director of Retention and Student Success. In this role, I have also collaborated with key campus partners to develop the Proud to Be First program, which serves our ever-growing first-generation student population. At the present time, 1 in 5 Tommies identify as first-generation college students. That number not only is growing at our institution, but also nationally. It's exciting to be a part of this project to discuss this very important topic. As we think about ways to best support our first-generation students, those who are the first in their family to attend or to graduate from a 4-year institution, we have found that it is important to understand the unique hurdles and the strengths and the richness of experiences that our first-gen and BIPOC students bring to our campuses and our places of employment. It is important to understand that our first-generation BIPOC and/or low-income communities are more likely to commute to school, have family obligations, and work throughout college. These variables may limit their ability to engage in unpaid internships and extracurricular activities that typically appeal to potential employers. We also know that our first-gen and BIPOC communities bring a wealth of strengths that are often not identified or articulated in the job or internship search process, such as persistence, resourcefulness, and cultural capital. They may also not have the family or professional networks to help guide them in their preparation for the job search. Some research has also shown that first-generation students are less likely than other students to access their college's career resources. I found that first-gen students typically approach their job search with less confidence and knowledge about the process. At St. Thomas, we highly value our Career Development Center, and we make efforts to connect our students with this rich resource as soon as they come to college so that they can utilize it throughout their experience. Lastly, as we work diligently to support, recruit, and retain our BIPOC and first-gen students, interns, and future employees, I reflected on what I believe makes a difference, and that is representation, relationship building, and trust. These are the things that take time, but will have the biggest impact. It cannot be a transactional experience. When I think about relationship building and trust, I immediately think about opportunities to connect meaningfully with students through our cultural clubs and organizations. Clearly articulating your DEI mission is crucial. This will make a difference. Students are savvy and would like to work for a company that values them as people. Students bring a richness of identities, strengths, and experiences. Getting to know them will enhance the process, and their diverse voice, perspective, and skill set will enhance your work environment as well. Given this important webinar topic, job search and internship search through the lens of first-generation and BIPOC students, we believed hearing directly from some of our alumni would be the most impactful. So I want to go ahead and allow our amazing young Tommy alum to introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Andrea Howley. I am a 2010 graduate, and I'm currently working for a nonprofit in operations.
My name is Gafar. I am a 2020 graduate. I am currently working in the computer science kind of industry for a late stage startup in Seattle.
Very exciting. Well, we are so happy to have you here with us today, so thanks for taking the time. I want to talk a little bit about the interview. You know, once you're invited to that initial interview, did you feel like the recruiter and all the parties involved were good about communicating with you through that process, through that whole application process, so from start to finish? If you made it through that first gatekeeping piece, did you feel like the communication was good, or can you talk a little bit about that? What made you feel well informed in that process? And also on the flip side, what could recruiters, employers have done differently with regard to communication with you in your various job searches?
I think thinking back, there's been very few companies that I feel that I've had a good candidate experience. So I think a lot of times we know when we hear, oh, user experience. I don't think a lot of companies think about that candidate experience, right? And so it's just a domino effect. If just from the way that you have to apply is really cumbersome and complicated, you're probably going to be turned off. And same thing just with the level of communication and the type of communication that goes on thereafter. I would say, I think most of the time it comes in an email, right? Okay, here you go, sign up for your next interview, and that's fine. I think sometimes where it's a little bit deflating or discouraging is when there's a month or just weeks of silence because you don't know where you stand in the process. So I think if that's the case, to me, it's just common courtesy, right? You tell your customers, if something is on back order or what have you. Same thing with candidates. I mean, I think there's still that human element that sometimes gets missed. And I've also, even recently, as probably 6 months ago, when I've made it to final round interviews, I either have been ghosted and don't get told, hey, thank you so much, you didn't make it, or it's the automatic rejection email at the end. And I have to say that if you've made it to the very end, it needs to be a personal note, not the generic, thank you so much, we're going a different way, or, your qualifications didn't meet. So it's just, I think those few examples that I think the process can always improve.
And when you have that experience, it just makes me think about this. When you have that experience, does that shape your feeling about a particular company and whether or not you would be willing to apply for another position at those companies?
I would say yes. There was one nonprofit that I made it to the final round, and And I actually turned them down.
That question triggers a lot of painful memories of my interview processes. It's overwhelming. I can definitely say, at least in my industry, it's definitely overwhelming because there's so many people in the process that you're working with. You have at least like 3 recruiters that you're kind of communicating with scheduling, with providing documentation guides, information, someone that you're actually talking to about what the interview process is going to look like. And you got all these things like coming at you, and it's just like so much. And you kind of carry that on with multiple interviews at the same time that you're doing, and it just becomes information overload and just kind of stressful, especially when these interviews, at least in my industries, they're like 4 hours long, back-to-back interviews with different people and different teams. And, there's so much preparation that has to go into it, from the technical portion to just the verbal portion of just being able to communicate properly your story, your background, your experience, and really just sell yourself.
We talked in the opening a little bit about how the experience can be very transactional and really trying to shift things to more of that relationship building and respect and culture and trust. And so some of the things that you both have touched on really speak to that piece as well. Well, let's transition a little bit into the employer research aspect. So as you're thinking about the companies in which you're applying to, what influenced you to apply to the employers that you did?
I've looked at the industries that spark energy or spark passion in me. I look at their reviews. I look at what they do well or what that organization is known for. I look at what they do in the community. I look at if they have global reach or if they are a global organization. And if not, just see, what regions they're in. I also look at their quarterly financial statements, which a lot of times people don't know. There's a lot of information in those statements that is not just financial information. And of course, I look at their annual report, and I take a look at, where they rank on certain, rankings. Not sometimes they're really skewed and biased, but I just still take a look at to see where they rank and, best places to work, best places for, women, mothers, etc. And of course, I tap my network and see if anybody knows anything about that organization.
Great. Gafar, what do you want to say about this particular question?
I think you know me well, Tanya, to understand what kind of answer I'll give you. But one of my biggest things that has definitely piqued my interest in a company, organization, is definitely money. And not to say money is the only thing that matters. It definitely isn't. There's a lot of other things that go into it, but that is definitely a big drawing point. And at least for me right now in my career, prestige, being able to get a prestigious company on my resume, reputation, prestige, those things are huge right now, I think, for a lot of people my age, primarily because, to have that on your resume is kind of like one of those things that you're set for life, where it's like, I can go anywhere now. Like, I have this is going to be my ticket, my golden ticket. And to get like a company that gives you that kind of reputation, that prestige, it gives you this kind of sense of comfort to be able to kind of be like, hey, recruiters, I worked at this big company right here, and only the best of the best really work here.
So again, when you're looking at the employer, you all have talked about lots of things that you were looking into, right? Did you look for information? And I think you touched on this a little bit, Andrea, but did you look for information specific about that inclusive culture or any affinity groups that might be within the companies that you'd be applying?
When I'm researching into an organization or a company that I'm interested in applying to, I go search up all the tea, all the dirt I can find about this industry. And that might mean me going to anonymous, job posting sites like Blind, where people are talking about the organization, giving reviews, similar things to like Glassdoor, and just really researching and, kind of like digging in to like find out like, hey, is this company, does this company have bad work ethics? Do they kind of force their employees to do something, insane? Is it, very is the work-life balance terrible? Like, what do I need to know before I really go into these interviews with the hiring managers, so I can actually ask them these questions about like these tough situations. And that's another thing. It's like, yeah, you can do as much research as you can, but you can also kind of read the vibe from the people you're interviewing with. For example, my current company that I'm in right now, I asked them a lot of questions. I grilled them with a lot of things about like how's work-life balance, what's the structure if someone wants to take a day off, how do you guys kind of handle that, in the last minute, like if things come up, how do you guys prioritize, a person's well-being, mental state, with the work that they're being handed to, and just kind of asking them these like kind of real questions that really matter to you, and just kind of picking up how they respond or what kind of answers they give you.
I would also say too, as a professional of color, when I'm speaking to a recruiter, if I did get past the gatekeeper, I'm gonna ask some of these questions. If I were a non professional of color, I don't know, I might not ask about DE&I and culture and affinity groups, but to me, it's very telling if it's, for example, an organization that has great reports, great accolades, metrics on where they are as an organization with diversity and cultures and allyship and everything. And then I ask the recruiter where the organization is and how they're, things in their strategic plan and where they are at in their own DE&I journey, and they can't answer those questions. To me, that's very telling.
So you both have touched on this. Very key feedback. Thank you so much for your candid feedback here. And I don't want to assume, but I'm going to ask this question. So you asked some really important questions of the recruiters or of the, during the interview process about that work-life balance, those things that are really important to you as a person. Are these also important and influential in making that decision about whether or not this is the place of employment for you? Could that be a deal breaker? Andrea, to your question, is that a deal breaker if a recruiter, for example, cannot talk about the DEI journey?
Yeah, I think it's tough. How bad do I want that position? How bad do I want to get into that corporation? I think it has sat poorly with me in the past. I don't know. It's the chicken and the egg, right? What do you want more? Yeah, I don't know. I think it's case by case situation for me personally. I kind of want to give them the benefit of the doubt, or I don't know. But I do ask about these things or these initiatives, and if they happen before the pandemic, or if it's a new thing, if it's a newer thing to the organization, I kind of think twice. I've been there, done that. I've started affinity groups. I've started from scratch, helping organizations out with their diversity culture journey. And it's a lot, it's grinding work. And so I think where I am in my career, it's important that it's already an established thing, that the culture, that the people are already ingrained in that, because it's important to me. Yeah.
Thank you. Gafar, anything to add?
It's kind of definitely for me similar to what Andrew was saying. There's a lot of factors that go into it, and I think it's a very big factor, and it's kind of those things where you gotta really kind of like look at in a holistic view, where it's like, yeah, this matters, but it depends, where am I at? What do I need right now? Is this kind of like a temporary thing? Do I want to be here for a long time? Do I just want to like come in here, get the name, and bounce out in a couple of years? It's like, how long can I really last here? These kind of things go in my head about like how I feel about the organization. And I think, when a recruiter or the hiring manager are kind of displaying this kind of lack of concern for these kind of things, it's a red flag.
Mm-hmm.
And it's definitely something that does weigh down for me, where it's like, yeah, I don't really want to even continue with the interview. I don't even want to continue with, the conversation. It feels like I'm not wanted. And when it feels like I'm not wanted somewhere, I'm not going to be happy. And if I'm not going to be happy, you know, that's going to either look poorly on me. I'm going to hate my job. Even if they're paying me a buttload of money, it's still going to be one of those things where it's like, I could go somewhere else and hopefully make the same amount or somewhere close. You know, I've heard stories of people who are making tons of cash, and then, you know, they're just not happy and they go somewhere else because, you know, it fits what they're looking for, even if they're getting paid less, because, you know, they would rather be happy and, you know, making a little bit less than working somewhere where they despise and making a lot more money.
Great. Well, this is such insightful conversation. Thank you both so much. I have one last question. So as you think about this DE&I journey, it's pretty salient in this conversation. This is a great opportunity for you to just kind of share, how can employers brand themselves better to applicants, especially about their commitment to DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion?
This is really hard, honestly. Some huge companies have great reports, great statements. Like I've mentioned, I sound like a broken record, great accolades, awards, etc. But then it totally changes in the location or the office that you're looking to apply for, especially if it's not the headquarter location. You know, if it's a company with many locations, some may not see that importance, right? Because again, it's driven by headquarters, it's driven by the board of directors, the executive committee. And so the best thing to do is hopefully have the contacts in that company to get the raw information and the non-fluffy. But it's hard. I mean, it's something I still navigate to this day. I think also sometimes it's helpful to have a recruiter of color. And it might be a little bit of a generalization, but sometimes, you know, when I am asking about the questions about where are you at, you know, in your personal diversity, equity, inclusion journey, it's awkward to have that recruiter hear that question. I think they're not used to it and they're not prepared for it. And so then it becomes this kind of awkward conversation, which to me, I can talk to anybody, you know, yeah, that's just how I am. But then it just becomes this kind of tense situation, not tense, but weird vibe in the conversation. And I think too, you know, when organizations want to reflect the populations they sell products or services in, the same thing should be applicable for recruiting. And let's see what else. There was something else I was going to say. If recruiters or organizations want to tap into a particular population, community, group, etc., be part of the community, you know, in capital letters, bolded. Learn about the group, learn about the people, the community. It's super important, right, to be part of groups like National Black MBA and that, you know, the Black Accountant Association, Prospanica, Society of Hispanic Engineers. They need to be part of those organizations and not just expect that those candidates are going to come from those organizations if they just don't have you know, brand identity, a loyalty to the people. And I can't stress enough that I don't think recruiters are trained enough, or they are not shown the value of community involvement or volunteerism on applicants' resume. Sometimes that is critical when somebody's trying to pivot or get into an industry or into a company, because again, it's all transferable skills. So the hardest thing for me personally has been to get past the gatekeepers. I've said it once, twice, I'll keep saying it. You know, the AI systems aren't the answers for everything. So I think if organizations are really trying to get into a particular group or population, there needs to be a little bit more old school scanning of resumes by hand, or just really seeing who that person is holistically, and not just if they fit into the cookie cutter resume template, or if there's X amount of keywords in their resume or experiences. So to me, I think it's not valued enough, and that human element isn't there anymore because we let the systems do it all. So I think most of the times, if an applicant doesn't fit all of the requirements or the criteria, they don't know the backstory. They don't know if they're trying to pivot, if they're trying to get into that company and learn it, you know, rather than just a transactional click, submit. Chances are, you know, there's a bigger reason for that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Gafar?
Yeah, through kind of my journey applying to corporations and, you know, interviewing and all that, something that I've picked up is I just stopped applying to a company's I just stopped applying through like the company's website. I've just kind of gotten that dirt taste of getting rejected without even having my resume being seen. And I've just kind of went with the approach of either going straight to the hiring manager, and that could be via going on LinkedIn, literally typing in hiring manager, certain company, and then like, position, and then looking at their LinkedIn post, literally being like, hey, I saw you guys have a position. I'd love to talk more about it. I would like to see where I would fit in. And then from there, going straight to an interview process with them. Or my second approach is going to events like Afrotech, which is a big, tech event that's all virtually done, that allows recruiters to meet with, African Americans, Black population, just, interact with them, and also kind of allow us to kind of, present our skills, to show our resumes, and actually get that kind of like, get past that kind of gatekeeper where it's like, hey, are you even going to look at my resume? Are you even going to pass me in my resume? These kind of things. Kind of having done those things have always, most of the time, worked way better than me going onto the website, applying, and then getting rejected, or me having to wait for someone to notice me. It's not about your resume sometimes, it's about who you know, and how certain people have kind of a better leverage of that just based off of their circumstances and where they've been positioned in life, while other groups of people are put in situations where they don't have that luxury, they don't have that blessing to be able to kind of meet people who are from environments where they can really leverage and take them to the next stage of their career.
Well, I just want to thank you both so much for taking time out of your busy work days to participate in this very important webinar. So thank you so much for your insights, your candidness, and all of those pieces. You're two of my favorite Tanya alum. So thank you again so much for that time. And I think, just to kind of wrap all of this up, we heard a lot about, transparency, representation, seeing themselves in the companies in which they're applying to. We're talking about relationship building that trust, and just some very common and practical things that can be applied to the job search, the recruiting process, and the search in general. So again, I want to thank you all for your time.
And that is that is it. That is you heard right from our alumni and their candid thoughts and their experiences. I'm going to go next to some questions to our panelists as they react to what we just heard. So Dr. Buffy Smith, you're first up, my dear. Thank you. So given what you heard, what can organizations do to create healthy, trusting, and affirming work environments for first-gen and BIPOC professionals?
Thank you, Jennifer. And I just have to say that video was powerful and our alums are amazing. When I think about what companies, organizations can do in terms of creating a healthy, affirming environment for first generation and BIPOC professionals, I think of three things. One is to make the organizational culture visible. Two is to provide formal peer mentors. And then three is to provide opportunities to build social capital with senior leaders in the organization. So the first one, making the organizational culture visible. When I refer to organizational culture, I'm talking about the unwritten sort of norms, values, expectations, codes of behavior that you have to adhere to in order to succeed or thrive in a particular organization. Now, this culture is not outlined in the employee handbook. This culture is important although it is invisible, it's important because it is what we evaluate and judge our colleagues, employees on. But it's not fair because it's not transparent or explicit. We are evaluating employees, especially BIPOC and first generation professionals, on a culture that they're not aware of yet. And so it is the responsibility of recruiters and hiring managers to make the invisible culture visible. Otherwise, it's just not fair to evaluate BIPOC and first generation scholars on information and knowledge that they should know. And how do you know something that you don't know, right? The second is provide formal peer mentors. So the best way to really understand this invisible culture, organizational culture, is to have mentors. Someone who has at least maybe 2 years of experience in an organization that will serve as a cultural co-translator. So this mentor, a former mentor, would serve certainly, one, to affirm and validate the rich, diverse cultural backgrounds and lived experiences of employees, and at the same time, help employees understand and navigate the sort of cultural workplace maze that they're going to experience. A good former mentor will not only serve as this cultural translator, but they are also going to help that mentor, help that employee by helping them build social capital. And so that leads us to that third recommendation is, how do you build social capital in a meaningful way? So yes, the mentor will extend their social capital and help the employee, but that does not help the employee develop their own social capital, which is very important as they navigate that particular profession. So one suggestion is to, a company should create an opportunity for allowing employees to sort of spotlight their talent and their gifts on a team project. So if you had this sort of spotlight team project event and you invited senior leaders in a company to attend that event, that would be one way that would take off the pressure from the employee who will be nervous in interacting with a senior leader. But it's also a very good way where the senior leaders will get to know the employees more. They remember their names and, most importantly, remember their achievements. It's awkward when we have these large social events, and it's more or less this sort of get to know and make these contacts, but there's no real meaningful connection during these large social events. So to have an event that is tailored to highlight an employee and their accomplishment and achievements, that puts them at a status where they can showcase their talent, their intellect, their gifts in a way that will be more meaningful for the senior leader, and also it will make the employee feel more comfortable talking to more people on the team. So those would be my suggestions in terms of how we could help first generation and BIPOC professionals navigate an environment, and hopefully companies as well can make it more affirming.
Thanks. Thank you, Buffy, for that perspective and your recommendations. Those are very important. Can you define imposter syndrome and how that impacts our first generation and BIPOC professionals? That'd be helpful. Thanks.
So I think a simple definition of imposter syndrome is thinking of it as a lack of confidence in one's ability to do a particular job and to do that job well. It's a sense that you're not good enough, and eventually someone will find out that you're a fraud, and they will discover this, and you will lose your position. So it's always important to look at some of the factors that cause the imposter syndrome. So one of the underlying factors that cause the imposter syndrome is to think of it in terms of the messages that first generation and BIPOC professionals have heard during the course of their careers, also starting before they became professionals in schools. If you have heard messages that you are lazy, you're not smart, you're not good enough, that the only way you will achieve something is through charity or social sponsored government programs like affirmative action, but it's never based on your intellect, your talents, and your gifts. It's never based on merit. Then we shouldn't be surprised why many of our first generation and BIPOC professionals suffer from imposter syndrome. The messages that they hear from the different social groups in our society, our social institutions, the media, are these messages of deficiency over and over and over again. And so then when they enter into the workforce and they are present and they're trying to navigate this new work culture, and they don't have a mentor there, and the organizational culture is not visible to them, but yet they're being evaluated on that, they're going to feel a sense of inadequacy. And if you don't have anyone there to counter those messages that you've heard over and over again, then you're left there, and you're sometimes left there to suffer in silence, because you would think like, oh, why don't they reach out for help? Well, remember, if you think you are an imposter, the last thing you want to do is to confirm that by asking a lot of questions. So if you had a mentor there where it's a safe space to ask those questions that will help you develop and learn and grow in the company, you begin to develop a better sense of confidence. And one of the best ways to minimize imposter syndrome is to have diverse representation at all levels in the organization. So absolutely, you need diverse representation at the entry level, but also at the middle management level, and of course at the senior level as well. So when an employee comes into a company and they see that there's a critical mass of diverse representation, so not just a few in each of those categories, because that lends to being a token and not a critical mass. If they see a critical mass of representation, they're more likely to see a future at that company, at that organization. So representation absolutely matters. It matters in terms of destigmatizing the feeling of being an imposter in this situation. It builds confidence, and it provides them the hope and the vision of that they could see themselves as being a future leader of that organization. So the imposter syndrome is just one evidence of the inequities that we have in our society. And these inequities that we have embedded in our workforce, these are inequities that we actually socially constructed and created. So then it is the responsibility of all of us in our workplace to dismantle those inequities. We created the social problem, and I hope and pray that we have the will to dismantle and solve this social problem.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much, Buffy. Absolutely. Background, identity, self-image, all of these have clear impacts. I'm going to thank you, appreciate your perspective and your background as a sociology professor too. I'm going to move to Chris Donnelly now, our Director of Internship Programs there at Doherty Family College. Chris, hello.
Hello.
Hello. We heard, from our alumni in that video that they felt organizational climate and commitment to diversity and inclusion was really important to them. They researched employers specifically seeking out this type of information. So applicants' perceptions of organizational culture is definitely something to pay attention to. So in your work with Doherty Family College students seeking internships, What are some of the ways you've witnessed, say, unconscious bias playing out and playing a role in the recruiting process?
I think that there are still a lot of ways that we see unconscious bias coming into the recruiting process, particularly through the lens of the internship side, right? The first one is resume experience. Our students often get comments about, well, just, wow, you don't have a lot of experience, which is part of the point of the internship, but it's also then missing out on a lot of the work experience and skills our students have are more informal and harder to put on a resume. It doesn't mean that they haven't had tons of experience, right? Many of our students are doing a lot of helping support their families. There might be obligations at home with childcare. I have a number of students who were responsible for their siblings learning during online learning because their parents don't have the type of jobs where they were able to work from home, right? A lot of frontline type of workers. So all of those pieces that normally would fill another student's resume, right, through traditional work experience, some BIPOC students and first generation students don't have. The other side of that too is when you're busy with all of those other pieces, you're not necessarily as involved in some of the different clubs or activities. So same thing, won't show up on your resume as experience, but they are certainly transferable skills. And I would say that's another piece of the first generation of BIPOC students is they don't necessarily know yet, particularly at an internship level. And even in those first career interviews, they don't always necessarily know how to translate those skills. And so I think some of that's going to take the skill of the recruiter to ask some of those questions more, right? To really understand the type of experience they have, because it's not going to show up on the resume. Related to that would be GPA. If there's a GPA requirement, that also can be really misleading. You might have the best candidate might be someone who's like a 3.0 and has been balancing all kinds of responsibilities, as opposed to a student who's a 3.5 but had no other responsibilities to balance, right? That's definitely a bias that I see students facing as they're heading into interviews. Another one is scheduling. So we've had a number of students who I've worked with in the past where, right, they have, this is the interview time I was given, but here's the other things, right, I'm trying to balance in my life, or I'm in the middle, that's when I'm going to be in transit on the bus to get from place, A to B. And so how much more flexible could we be with some of these candidates, which also, right, is a demonstration of one of the things that you heard from our alumni on the video. Some of that flexibility would show some of the inclusivity and the practices that you might be already working on in the work within your workforce. And that's a great way to be able to demonstrate it here. Another area where we tend to see students facing bias is with some of the expectations of professionalism. This goes back to one of the things that Dr. Smith was talking about, right, with invisible culture. So the idea of eye contact, which is still, culturally, there's a lot of cultural nuance to eye contact, and especially if a student's also feeling that imposter syndrome and they're feeling that power differential between the person they're interviewing with, that's even more complicated in some cases, especially within the cultural nuance for students. There also is often are comments about slower responses or a lot of ums and ahs. And in many instances, particularly in the case of our Doherty Family College students, they're multilingual. And so sometimes the pause, that gap, is some of the translation they're doing to try and find the words that they want from their primary language and making that translation space. Which is, of course, even harder when you're nervous, right? And even harder if you feel like you might not fit in and you're doing the imposter syndrome piece. And I would say the final piece the final area I want to talk about with unconscious bias that we find our students facing fairly frequently, right? And definitely within other BIPOC and first generation students is in the interactions itself, and the idea of like relatability and how they come across within the interview. Some of that is about their mimicking the idea of professionalism that they think they're supposed to have, which often is a pretty buttoned down, not showing much of their personality. But that's the impression that they have that they're supposed to make. And so they stifle some of their own personality in an attempt to try to fit in, which of course then doesn't let you have a chance to see them. So the different ways that our students and even Tanya talked about, like a building relationship with them, even through that interview, will help bring that back out, right? Let them feel more comfortable and feel at a space where they're actually allowed to be able to be themselves, which also comes back into imposter syndrome, right? If they're feeling like I don't belong here, and they're trying to gauge how they're doing off of your reaction. So a lot of times then it gets more complicated when things are on video, or if they're on the phone and they don't have that chance to truly build in those reactions. So Jennifer, those are some of the more common ways we see unconscious bias playing out and how our students have to try and react.
Great perspectives and good awareness building. I appreciate your reminders about things like paying attention to transferable skills, right? And you had some great suggestions and again, awareness building for listeners. In just a few minutes, you and I also have talked about the hidden rules sometimes and barriers that they might create. What are some of the hidden rules that our audience should be aware of?
I think there are probably just as many hidden rules as there are ways that unconscious bias can show up, right? The first one, I really think is about timing. So when internships and particularly in the internship side, when internships are posted and where you are recruiting those students, you're probably missing phenomenal BIPOC and first generation candidates because, right, they don't know what they don't know. They don't know when this process begins, and which is usually a lot earlier than people think, right? I was just finishing matching a few students to do some interviews for an internship that is actually next summer, 2023, and for a program like that, which is way ahead of when students think. Even for a lot of the fall recruiting is in advance of when first generation and BIPOC students think. They don't have someone else reminding them that this is the process, here's the timing. So those are important things to think about. Also where to go look for those types of things, those roles. Terminology comes up all of the time, and this comes in particularly in how students might answer a question, but also within like an onboarding process or pre-screening process. There's a lot of terminology in the hiring that is new to students. So if you're first generation, right, then you don't know how to answer those. And sometimes you answer something wrong and you get, sort of kicked out of the process. I know that the alumni mentioned the idea of multiple steps from multiple people, multiple contexts. And that really is one of those hidden rules, those things that trips people up. They're not expecting, these young professionals aren't expecting to have multiple steps, or they might get then a background check that's coming from a different email address and a different system that they need to set up. And how do they find their way through those things? So those are definitely some of the hidden rules. So, the biggest thing a piece of advice that I have is clarity and transparency on that process. Like, here's all the different steps. Here's kind of the timing. Here's where things will be coming from. That will really help ease the system and ease them as they go through. And there's just a lot of pieces along the way. I think the other one, which was also mentioned by our alumni, is where that follow-up comes, right, from the recruiter partner. I've dealt with a lot of students who will only apply for one thing at a time, right? Because they don't want to lead anyone else on. So they're waiting to see if they get yours before they would apply for anything else. And then they may have missed out on another opportunity.
Really, really helpful perspective. I appreciate, your direct experience with your students and their internship journey is really valuable. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. Yeah. Okay. And in our last 15 minutes, we're going to bring in our senior D&I leaders from Anderson Corporation and Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Minnesota. So thank you both for being here, Angel and Tracy. So I hope I'm going to get through most of these questions, but we'll just see how it goes here. And I'm asking each of you to respond if you can. And we can start with Tracy and then go to Angel. So with an increasingly diverse pool of college graduate talent, and given all the information that we've just heard, what we're interested in knowing from you is, what is your company, what has your employer organization been doing in the last few years? Have you made any tweaks, changes in these various phases of this recruiting and hiring process for your intern and early career talent? I'll just make that an open-ended question and let you jump in.
Wow, the video was so important and great to hear. I feel like our organization is kind of like on helter skelter. We are moving, and we're moving at a very fast pace to try to address some of these issues that we are hearing about, understanding the candidate experience, and then really challenging ourselves to really think through this through a whole different lens. The workplace has changed, and it has changed drastically. And so preparing ourselves to be able to get the talent that we need in the organization at all levels. We do believe that people are our greatest assets. And so some of the things that I'll just talk about briefly are even looking at the language on your postings that you have out there and making sure that they are inclusive. There are free websites out there where you can drop a posting in, and it will help you to change your language as you are, you know, posting positions. Another thing that is important, I think, is really looking at the requirements of the role. You know, looking at what you really need, and then challenging leaders on transferable skills. Do you actually need 5 years of experience or 2 years of experience, or do you need certain opportunities where people have some transferable skills that will help meet those requirements? When I think about like practices, when I think about sourcing practices, changing the practice of moving from posting a position and praying that someone would answer it, right, to being more strategic. What are we trying to accomplish? Why? And then posting a broader, wider net is so important. Now, there's cost with that, but that's okay, because you'll get a better talent pool of individuals that might be coming through. As we think about pipelines, and several people have talked about this already, it is building relationships with various organizations that will help us to get the pipelines. The young lady that talked about waiting for a long time to hear back about a position, oh my God, it is sickening how long it takes to try to get the calendars organized internally. And so we are moving the process and shaking up the process and looking at this differently. When we go in as a talent acquisition practitioner to talk with the leader, we're saying we need you to get in advance, even before we have a pool of people, to set some dates and times aside with the people that you want to be a part of the process. And if you can't, we may not work with you in the way that we've worked with you traditionally, because that is a huge problem. And in this market at this time, you have to make decisions very quickly. People are getting multiple job offers, and they will decline your offer if they get a better one. So it's very much important to really get out there and get out there quickly. Some of the things that we are also taking a look at is, this is a strategic opportunity for us as the company to come together. So we have done some bold moves. We've posted a position for a strategic senior director that brings all of our talent acquisition in the house under one manager, one leader, that can help us to streamline our process even more. And at this level of our organization, we've hired 2 additional people to support our talent acquisition, entry-level work that we're doing, and also to help us to build those pipelines. In addition to that, we're looking at policies, practices, and procedures, but more importantly, we're looking at our hiring managers and giving them some cultural competence to understand how you interact with different groups from a cultural well-being and a cultural, just looking at how the relationships are important and how it may be different than the traditional ways we've recruited in the past. And the final thing I would say is really around surveys. You know, we hire you into the company. Did we deliver on the promise that we were making during the interview process? And I'll leave it there and give Angel some time to react.
Yeah, you know, Tracy, you hit it right on the head. You know, in answer to that question, I think first of all, you have to do the work internally. And so what we've done at Blue Cross is really looked at our leadership, because if you can't see it, you can't be it. So we want to make sure that we have representation throughout our organization, starting at the top. And then that it's not tokenism. It's not just for the sake of positioning a body in a place so that they can be seen and we can say we have them. We really want those leaders to understand the reason why they're there. And it really has to do with who our customer is, what we're professing to do in community, what we want to achieve. And at Blue Cross, what we are putting as a top priority is mitigating systemic racism and barriers to healthy living amongst people in all social, economic, racial, zip codes, you name it. And so if we're going to do that, we need to make sure that we reflect the community that we serve, so that the decisions on products and services that are being made within the organization are being made with the proxy voice of those members and community at the table as those decisions are being made. So that's the very first thing. And I always use the analogy of a house. We have a front door that everyone comes through, and our recruiters and our talent acquisition staff are the ones who invite them to come into the house. And then we have hiring managers internally that will continue to advance and develop and encourage those individuals through the process and through their life cycle within the organization. And then there's the back of the house that we all go out to into community, right? And so we need to make sure that the house is tight and our foundation is strong before we recruit, because otherwise what we will have is that revolving door where people are coming in the house and they're going out the back door, and they tell their stories. As this young man said, they're looking at places like Blind and Glassdoor, and they're finding out who we really are versus who we say we are. And I think that's a really critical piece, is we need to be transparent. We need to be authentic. Where we've dropped the ball and we've got work to do, then we need to be honest about that, because they will see that, they will hear that, they will learn that about the organization. So if we don't have representation in our upper echelon or on our board, be honest about that. We acknowledge that we don't, and we're striving and working towards making a change in that area. They want to know who we are as an organization. So I really start by telling the story. What is our mission? Who are we here to serve? And what are some of the barriers that exist within the community, and how might we impact that? I also believe that you got to show up in the classrooms before they actually show up in the talent acquisition stage. So, and more so than standing, as Tracy said, posting and praying, I also don't believe we should get behind a 6-foot table at a career fair. I think that that's brand awareness. And of course, we need to do a certain level of that. But as you know, Jennifer, we showed up and talked to you and took the initiative to say, how can we become the SMEs? How can we tell our story? How can we help them know about us before they're looking for the job? So that by the time that they are, we've already fostered a relationship, we know about them, and we can bring them on board in a more intentional manner. And I think, really looking at that candidate from a holistic standpoint, I will tell you, when people apply for jobs within Blue Cross and I'm responsible for that job, it's great that they're in the queue that's in our ATS system. But I actually go out and look at who they are on LinkedIn, who they're connected to, what organizations are they affiliated with, what do they follow, what were some of the posts that they liked or shared. So I understand what really makes them, what makes them move in the space that they're in. What excites them? How knowledgeable and current and relevant are they on the topic? Because the resume is only going to tell us so much, and especially if they're in the very early stages of their career. But I can see where they volunteer. I can see who else they know. I can start talking to those individuals and saying, tell me a little bit about this individual. What has been your experience? I can see what they're really interested in. If they post a picture, that's half the battle. because many of our BIPOC students won't post pictures because they're afraid of what the perception of the employer is around professionalism. I can tell you that it took way more than the Crown Act to give us permission to show up like this. It's really important that we look at professionalism in a different way, that we take into consideration all those cultural nuances, that we appreciate the richness of perspective and experience when we talk to these young candidates, and not decide to just push them aside because their resume isn't chock full with lots of experience. What were the transferable skill sets? I even encourage, like I used to do with stay-at-home moms who have left the workforce to take care of children and re-enter, time management, project management, conflict resolution. These are all things that you did for those months or years when you were out of the workforce. Similarly to what Chris said, what have you done, and how can you illustrate your ability to manage time, to deal with some of those project management issues, to be cross-cultural in the dynamics that you have on campus and off campus. So these things are all really important, and I think we need to give credit for them.
Thank you. Thank you. Tracy, did you want to say anything more about how Anderson has been approaching diversity and inclusion training, or even what Angel was touching on in terms of making a more deeper relationship buildings with universities and colleges in your recruitment? I'm going to let you decide what you'd like to address.
Yeah, I'll start with the training. And I want everyone to know that at Anderson, we don't believe that you can just go sit through a class and you're changed. So this is a process. This is behavior change. This is also having a hard experience and then applying what you're learning from there. The training for Anderson, we use the house model too. So I love the words that you said, Angel, about the invitation for the recruiters. So I'm going to steal that from you. But in our house, we started with what we are calling Leading for Inclusion training, where we required all managers to go through this training if you were a manager of people. And in this training, we are really building Anderson's house on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We didn't want to just go buy something off the shelf because there are some things that you can get from multiple trainings. So we built our own internally. And so, how to be an inclusionary leader, what's the business case, why, what does this all mean to us, moving from unconscious bias to conscious inclusion, micro messaging, cultural competence, you name it, we put it in here and we required our leaders to go through. So far, about 700 individuals have gone through. We've now opened that training to individuals that are not people managers. And now we've opened it even deeper in the organization to all individuals can go through. We're also building that same house for our production, manufacturing, and logistics employees. So all of Anderson will understand where we're going and why. More importantly, when we think about talent acquisition, we've taken that same training and we put a talent acquisition lens on top of it. Because as Angel said, it is the talent acquisition professionals. They're our frontline individuals. They're the ones that are out there helping to get people to get in the door, but more importantly, getting people interested. We use our employee resource networks who have also been through a ton of training to help them help us with our brand awareness in communities. They're our army in the community. And then in addition to that, our recruiters have gone through a whole list of training from LGBTQ 101 recruiting to understanding what the current marketplace is, to us providing new tools and resources so that they have a understanding of the available workforce and how that workforce may look from an ethnic standpoint, a gender standpoint, you name it. Taking all of this into consideration, we now need to apply the knowledge that we have and then build relationships. So the next piece of our puzzle is really working on those strategic partners that someone named in the video, National Black MBA, SWE, all of these organizations that are national, that we can create a strategic pipeline for our people to be able to gain access to these individuals that they may not have had in the past. I hope that answered your question, Jennifer.
Yeah, you're both doing so much work, and we really appreciate that. When I created this concept for this session, I thought nobody's going to want to sit around for 90 minutes on a Zoom call. And of course, we need a full 90 minutes to unpack all of this. So I apologize for cutting you short, because there's so much more here. And if there were any questions, we may kind of compile. I'm getting an idea, Mark. We have created a separate web page within our employer site. It's called Inclusive Hiring. And I would love it if we might have contributions from folks like you and Angel to maybe we could share some of your best practices online for some of our other employer partners, if you'd be willing to share. But we'll work on that idea as we go. Thank you very much. Zan, there's a lot of people I need to thank. Xander's going to throw up a slide for all the people that have been involved in putting this together. My colleagues at St. Thomas were the first people I tapped. Very, very important. And I won't be able to list all their names, but first and foremost, we thank our panelists for their time, Dr. Buffy Smith, Chris Donnelly, Tanya Peterson, Angel Udine, and I hear Dr. Tracy Gibson. Thank you. And our alumni, Andrea Howley and Jafar Amuda. Xander and our tech team, we couldn't have done this without you, and all of the people in communications and our IT and my colleagues in the Career Center have helped me shape this as well. And to Karen McCoy, thank you for your impetus and your encouragement. We appreciate it again, a couple minutes over, but this conversation will be continued. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, and we're dropping off. Thanks. Down to, boy, there's people that want to stay. Well,
Probably want to see if there's any pearls of wisdom that we share amongst ourselves.
Oh yeah,
That's right.
That's right. Yeah, Xander, if I hit end, the whole thing ends, right? So I don't want to do that yet. Right? Where did he go? He left. I think it's just us. Here it is. You can end the webinar.
There you go.
He says, okay, I will end it, but what about you? I don't want you
Ending the
guys to go
webinar will
away.
just close it to the attendees, not the panelists.
It says end webinar for all.
Well, if we could